early, and that's because I was waiting for one of the councillors who hasn't arrived yet. He may appear, and in which case he will join in. No, that's not him arriving. He'll join in when he can. He won't be allowed to participate in the case that we're hearing about at the time when he comes in. Welcome everyone to this meeting of Kensington and Chelsea's Planning Applications Committee this evening. You're all very welcome, and it's good to see a good turnout. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Charles O'Connor. I'm one of the Vice Chairman of the committee, and I'm chairing this evening's proceedings. And on my right are three of my fellow councillors who, together with me, will be taking the decisions this evening. We've got Councillor Mo Bakhtiar on the far side, Councillor Dory Schmetterling, and Councillor Maxwell Woodger. And I think that's Councillor Dorian just arriving. He will be joining us very shortly. And then on my left are the officers, the senior of whom present this evening is Martin Lomas on my immediate left. And the presenting officers this evening are Alison Long and Derek Taylor. And we're joined by other officers from the governance and legal teams. And if they need to speak, I will introduce them. And the procedure will be well known to those of you who've been to our meetings before, but if any of you are new, I'll explain it as we go along. I just emphasise at the outset that all the councillors have read the papers that have been provided to us and the addenda that we've been sent as well today. We have no apologies for absence now. Councillor Duran is here. And are there any declarations of interest from any members of the committee, please? Councillor Bakhtiar.
I have called in 6 item for Victoria Grove to the committee, and I will be invited to have a look. So I'll step aside when we come to this application.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other declarations? No. Okay, and there are some minutes of the meeting held on 25th of January, which was chaired by me and Councillor Schmetterling and Councillor Woodger. You were both here. May I sign those as a true and accurate record? Thank you very much. So for this evening's meeting, the running order is as follows. First of all, it's the Lansdowne Muse application, then Hornton Street, 56 to 58 Hornton Street, we've got 2 applications there, and then the Little Boltons, Kingsgate House, Victoria Grove, Abingdon Road, and Kensington Court Place. So I think that's it. So we move over to Lansdowne Muse, and that's Mr. Taylor, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can sort of draw the committee's attention, first of all, to the addendum reports that was circulated yesterday. There are 4 further objections in the addendum reports, and a further representation from Councillor Lindsay clarifying his earlier objection, and also there's a letter from the applicants summarising their scheme, so that they're all in the addendum reports. And so for the, hang on. Right, okay, I think it's that. I won't touch anything. Right, so I apologise in advance. We have a slightly temperamental system this evening, so if the screen goes blank, just bear with us. This application is for the demolition of the 2 existing 2-storey houses and the erection of a 3-storey building, which would comprise 6 flats. The first image there is an aerial image that shows the application site outlined in red, and you can see there Clarendon Road to the left, and then the taller buildings along Lansdowne Muse to the right. to the immediate right of the site, that's Green's Court that you'd have seen discussed in the report. And then those are the buildings of Holland Park Avenue at the lower part of the image. That's a sort of bulk diagram from the daylight study that's just useful in sort of showing the juxtaposition of buildings, and it doesn't give you the detail. But what it does show you immediately is that this is a very enclosed site that actually runs quite a long way to the south of Lansdowne Muse, and you can see it's quite tightly surrounded by buildings on its southern side. And that's what the site appears like from the road. So that's obviously taken from the corner, just at the corner of Cranley House. And you can see the application buildings as they exist there, identified in red. And you can see behind the tall flank wall of Green's Court, which is identified as number 4, or number 4 is written on the side. And that's just a closer up image to show the buildings that exist that would be demolished. And then that's looking further along towards the east, with Green's Court sort of dominant in the photograph, central to it, and the application buildings to the right. That's actually taken looking towards the rear of the existing building. So again, that just confirms the proximity that exists between the existing buildings and those surrounding it at the rear. And then that's taken looking roughly back towards where the last photograph was taken from, with the application site in the mid-foreground. And you can see the main part of the houses there on the right-hand side. And then the green there is the existing, and the blue is the proposed. So that's taken looking roughly in a southerly direction with the existing buildings, and you can see there how they'd be extended with the blue proposed building. And then that's just the reverse, so looking sort of roughly the other way, that's the existing building and the proposed buildings. So I'll just go backwards briefly and then forwards again. In drawing terms, that's the existing front elevation. The longer image at the bottom sort of shows Green's Court in the middle, and then the buildings of the Muse to the other side of Green's Court. And then the upper image shows a closer up image of the existing building. And those are the same two images, but with the proposed buildings. So that's the existing, and that's the proposed. And then in section terms, that's the existing section and the proposed section. So you can see there, there's obviously a new level added, and then you can see the rear extensions. And then that's the proposed southwest elevation. If you look closely, I don't know if you'll see it at that distance, but the blue line that you can see central to the image, that shows you the profile of the existing building, which is quite a useful reference point. And then that's the proposed second floor plan. So you can see there, there's a lot of discussion in the reports and in the representations relating to the terraces at the rear and how the building extends to the rear. And you can see there the terraces and also the green roof area at the rear of the building. And then that's the proposed southwest elevation in coloured up form. And you can see there that where the terraces were on the last plan, you can see that it's proposed to have screens at the side of the terrace, which would obviously preclude overlooking in those directions. And that's an image, a computer-generated image of the rear of the building. And again, you can see there the terrace areas, and you can see the screens quite clearly flanking the terraces. And then that's an aerial image which shows the green roof area. And then I think that's quite useful, again, in seeing how the terraces are arranged at the rear. And then that's the proposed front elevation. And then CTMP extract showing the truck in front of the building and the amounts of Muse that would exist. And that shows how a vehicle would actually access the site. and that just shows how a vehicle would come out of the car park at Cranley House and then advance in an easterly direction along the Muse. And that's the last slide, Joe.
Thank you very much. Now, we have a veritable phalanx of people lined up to object to this, and there are 5 registered objector speakers and Councillor Lindsay as well. And how this works when we've got a councillor registered to speak is that an additional 2 minutes are given in addition to the 3 minutes that objectors get anyway. So the 5 minutes is shared between all those objecting. I think it's meant to be split 2 minutes to Councillor Lindsay and then 3 minutes to the others, but I'm not going to be too strict on that. Basically, you've got 5 minutes between all of you objectors to explain why you're opposed to the application. And I'll let you know when your time is up, and then we will hear from the agent to the applicant. So whoever'd like to go first, thank you.
Am I on? Yes, fine, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, council and everybody. My name is Peter Norbert, I represent Cranley and Lambert Road, and in particular the 8 flats with balconies at the rear backing onto Lansdowne Muse. I'd just like to say to start with that we at Cranley have been very appreciative of the work done by Rich Group in the area, bringing the standards up. But this one is a little bit different because this particular development is affecting on 4 sides. I've lived at Cranley since 1970 and enjoyed privacy, sunlight, open views it provides. We're all aware of the council's CL5 policy document referring to redevelopments. These are well thought out policies and serve well, provided they're respected. This development falls down, in our view, from Cranley point of view, on, I would say, 4 main aspects. Distance, the distance from Cranley to the proposed new building on the opposite side of the Muse is apparently 11.8 metres. Council's recommendation minimum, I'm told, is 18 metres. All privacy will be lost for both parties. B is sunlight. The height of the new building is increasing threefold. I'm not sure about that top floor, but at the pavement edge of the front, so it's come forward. Privacy will diminish our daylight again altogether, and sunlight, I think, on the bottom 2 rows of flats, the bottom 2, I think, will be denied sunlight. Privacy will be looking directly into each other's living rooms and bedrooms, probably at, again, 12 metres distance. And enclosure, the height and size of the proposed new development will dominate our outlook and views, casting a shadow and creating a harmful sense of enclosure. It's really about height and distance, I think. Our question is, to what degree is the council prepared to compromise on its policies for the very little gain in number of rooms against a background of 25 complaints, I think, and we believe around 100 actual emails submitted. So the area in general has but multiple complaints. I was going to go on about noise and disruption, but I don't think this is the place to talk about that. So thank you very much for your time. Sorry. Oh.
Are we done? You're not speaking, Councillor Lindsay?
It would be my intention, Councillor O'Connor, to speak last, and I shall be about a minute.
All right.
Seen all these photos. I sent in a whole lot of photos via your website. At some point tonight, are we going to be able to look at our perspective of the development, not their perspective through the photos?
The answer to that is if you've sent in photographs via the website, they're likely to be in our pack.
Yeah.
And therefore we've seen them. So no, they won't be put up on the screen necessarily unless Mr. Taylor's chosen to use one of your photographs
in his presentation.
No. Well, could you tell me your name, please?
Michelle Rowan. I live at 92 Holland Park Avenue.
Michelle Rowan, yes. Well, I believe your objection is in here. So no doubt we've seen your photographs.
Okay. Just asking.
But thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I live at 92 Holland Park Avenue. 3 and 4 Lansdowne Muse is an unusual site because it's surrounded on all 4 sides by other properties. 6 flats on Holland Park Avenue, 5 flats on Clarendon Road, 8 flats at Cranley and 2 houses in Greens Court. 21 properties in total. 21. That's a lot of properties. The proposed overdevelopment flouts council policy in terms of enclosure, overlooking and loss of light. The local plan recommends a distance of 18 metres between habitable rooms. As it is now, this distance does not exist for most of us, and by reducing the distances even further, the situation will be exacerbated. We had a report commissioned from the planning specialist UPP. They told us the current separation distance between my house and 4 Lansdowne Muse is 13.5 metres. The developers want to reduce this to 9.8 metres, with terraces 2.5 metres away from my property. 19 of the 21 surrounding properties have bedrooms and habitable rooms all facing at the back onto the site. We're excluding 6 Clarendon Road and we're excluding 12 Greens Court. At present, the back is a tranquil space.
I'm going to stop you there because the 5 minutes are now up and Councillor Lindsay wants to speak as well. I am going to allow him the 1 minute he wants to speak. In the interest of fairness, I'll grant 6 minutes to the applicant as well. So I'm afraid your time is up. Councillor Lindsay.
Colleagues, I note the comments made by the chairman of the Ladbroke Association, and I would want to endorse them. But I specifically want to focus on the issues of privacy, enclosure and loss of light. Paragraph 22, spot 3, spot 38 of the local plan recommends a distance of 8 metres between opposite habitable rooms. As it is currently configured, the proposed application does not achieve this for many of the residents looking onto the existing buildings. We've heard that already. For many, these already inadequate distances would be reduced still further by the proposed development. I acknowledge that frosted glass could be required for privacy, particularly for bedrooms, but I would question whether that fully adheres to developments being of the highest quality, something we in K&C like. I would also point out that there are many residents affected by the proposed development in 3 separate streets, and I would suggest that the cumulative effect on them is more than the sum of the individual parts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very succinct. Right, we have Mr. Warner, the agent of the applicant, registered to speak, and when you're ready, you have up to 6 minutes if you want to use that.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Graham Warner. I act on behalf of the applicant, which is a joint venture between the Thomas Pocklington Trust Charity for the Blind and the Rich Group, which is a local company active in the area for 30 years. Thomas Pocklington was a property developer who, after a period of temporary sight loss, bequeathed his fortune to fund the charity. Income through property continues to be an important funding means for the charity. The application proposals involve the demolition of 2 two-storey self-contained dwellings of no architectural merit, and its replacement with a building of improved design to provide 6 residential units of higher quality and specification. The proposals would deliver a number of clear benefits. Delivery of additional homes to meet acute demand in a manner envisaged by the London Plan to address the housing crisis London faces, enhancement to the visual quality and character of the Muse and Ladbroke Conservation Area, greening of roofs to provide ecological and landscape benefits, incorporation of an attenuation tank under the building to improve drainage management, and additional investment, construction jobs and local spending. The proposals were subject to 2 rounds of pre-application discussions with officers to get the design right, and feedback was also invited from the local community through flyer distribution to over 100 households prior to the application being submitted. 4 email responses were received, and these were detailed in the accompanying statement of community engagement. The application has received no objections from council officers or statutory consultees. We are, however, very conscious of the local representations made to the application and have been keen to address the issues which, as you've heard previously, generally relate to scale and overlooking and overbearing this. First, it is important to note that the proposed building is only half a storey taller than the existing ridge height of the existing buildings, but whereas the first floor is currently set back, the proposed ground and first floor now follow the building line of the Muse. This is a more appropriate arrangement and reflective of the character of the Muse within the Ladbroke conservation area. The proposed second floor element is set back and has a brown zinc metal appearance, in contrast to the London stop brick of the lower floors. This is to further reduce the bulk of the new building. In context, the proposed building is shorter in height than Greens Court and the buildings along Clarendon Road adjacent. It therefore replicates the subservient relationship exhibited at the other end of Greens Court at number 5 Lansdowne Muse, where this arrangement happily coexists. Given this presents an established characteristic of the Muse, we don't accept that the front of the building is oversized for this location. Turning to the rear, there is approximately 10 metre separation between first floor windows of Holland Park Avenue, which, although is shorter than the existing arrangement, it is considered appropriate for the historic close living pattern in this location. The second floor separation distance is around 12 metres and replicates the established separation distance at this level between Greens Court and Holland Park Avenue, so it is difficult to accept as being inappropriate. The second floor is also stepped back from Clarendon Road. Whilst these properties do not have any rear-facing habitable rooms at first floor level, the proposed design seeks to mitigate any perception of enclosure by way of this setback. We accept there is a perceived impact on daylight and sunlight in neighbouring buildings, but the daylight and sunlight assessment that accompanies the application confirms high level of compliance with only minor transgression on 2 non-habitable rooms, i.e. stairs or bathrooms. As the rear building envelope follows mostly established height and separation distances, we feel the scale of the building is appropriate and justified. In terms of overlooking, the existing properties already benefit from the rear first floor level windows, plus a raised terrace balcony area and ground floor amenity space. The proposals maintain this arrangement. The only additional outside space is the introduction of balconies at second floor level. These balconies are located at approximately the same level as the Green Court podium, and as such do not significantly increase the risk of overlooking or amenity harm. The new amenity space provides the minimum areas required by London Plan, which we feel is important following the pandemic and the need for outside space. Terraces to the rear of properties is not unique in this area. Existing properties, including numbers 92, 94 Holland Park, 6 Clarendon Road and Greens Court, all have comparable outdoor amenity space to the rear. It is not considered that the addition of 2 balconies at second floor level will substantially change how these areas already happily coexist. We have considered whether we could improve further the screening and enclosure of amenity space to protect existing or perceived overlooking potential. For example, we considered sliding external shutter panels to the rear windows or installing planters on the edge of the balconies and the terrace space. If councillors were concerned about the potential for overlooking, we will be happy to incorporate such measures, which could be secured through an additional planning condition. In summary, we understand the concerns about development in this dense area of London and the implications it may have. However, the benefits associated with providing new homes, enhanced visual characters to the Muse and conservation area, as noted by the case officer in his report, other benefits in terms of green roof, improved landscaping and drainage, weigh heavily in favour of these proposals. For this reason, we hope councillors will agree with the recommendation of their officers and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bang on 6 minutes. Now then, colleagues, we have the opportunity to put questions to the objectors and the agent of the applicant. So who would like to go first? Councillor Bakhtiar.
Thank you, Chair. Well, my question is to the objectors. You've heard the applicant's agent are flexible. That means they are prepared to take conditions on board. And to balance things in here, I would like to ask you, what condition would you like to see attached to this application, please? Thank you.
I'm the owner of number 12. My wife and I own number 12 Greens court. We've been there 15 years. We will lose all the sunlight on our balcony. I went to trouble having to commission a separate daylight report, and I've sent photographs to the planning office. And if they reduce the building line on the northern side back to the building line of Greens Court, or the residential accommodation of Greens Court, that wouldn't be a problem. But with the plans as drawn, I will no longer get sunlight in our balcony, on our balcony, which is our only bit of private outdoor space.
Thanks very much. I think you're Mr. Tet, aren't you?
I am. Yeah.
Yes, and you sent us an email.
I sent you several. Yeah.
You did, and I've read them. Thank you very much. And I was wondering if you could helpfully point out if Mr. Taylor gets up one of the aerial views where Greens Court is and where number 12 is.
Right, it's at first floor level, and it's not immediately apparent from the drawings. But I have to say that where the architect talked about bookending the building, if you're looking from Lansdowne Muse, on the left-hand side, the buildings. Okay, try to get that up.
Ooh.
Right, the first floor level. This might help. The new development. Can you do that? All right, okay. Look at the bottom picture, right? The bottom picture, the left-hand side of Greens Court, that building abuts, comes out to the front and can creates a corner there between the Greens Court and the building on the left. On the right-hand side, now, they're not bothered because the sun comes round at about 4 o'clock. The sun comes round and you can get sunlight on balcony. Now, at first floor level, that will be butted out to the entire depth of the balcony. And so I shall be in darkness or no sunlight. Do you follow that?
I think so. Can we see the before and after, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, that wall will come up, going straight up, push the arrow up, and then back to the building again. That will be a brick wall.
Right.
So I'm going to lose all my sunlight there.
Yeah, well, I do rather see your point there.
What?
I do rather see your point there.
Yeah.
I hadn't appreciated that it will come right out with the balcony.
Yeah. And also because the window's protruding, they get sunlight in the house as well. And I'm going to lose all of that. Again, it's not a question of a degree, it's a question I'm going to lose a whole lot.
Well, I'm not sure that can be right. I mean, you can't lose all the light to your balcony.
No, you're going to lose all the sunlight. I can lose all the sunlight.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Can we see the before and after, Mr. Taylor, just so we can appreciate the effect that Mr. Tat's talking about? There, I think possibly so. Right.
Okay, go back to the blue one. That's it. Now you can't really see it. That it looks as if the building line, the blue building, lines up with the residential accommodation of Greens Court. That is not so. It comes out about a metre.
Is that right, Mr. Taylor? Do you agree with that? Appreciate we'll normally come to you for questions a bit later on, but it strikes me this fairly important detail. Is that drawing wrong? And the blue building, the new building proposed, will actually come further forward. That side-on one was quite helpful that we just saw the... can we go back one?
So, yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, you can see there the difference in the front building line, if you look at this part of it.
So it's going to go up in front of... Sorry, can you just go back to the one? Oh, I see. Sorry, that is...
Cursor, it's this part of it here, which is obviously built out of the front.
Yeah, so It's where those eaves overhang, isn't it, at the top? The line of the new building will fall with the eaves, as it were, at the front of those sort of big dormers or gables or whatever they're called. Yeah, okay. So Mr. Tett's absolutely right that his balcony will have a great big brick wall alongside it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I hadn't appreciated that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, any further questions?
Could I also answer that question in as far as Cranley is concerned?
If one of the committee puts the question to you, absolutely can.
It's the same question.
Mr. Councillor Bakhtiar is putting the question to you. Yeah.
Yes. May I answer his question?
You may. Thank you.
Just in terms of the same elevation that we were looking at just then, by bringing the first floor forward and adding an additional floor, one of the things that also appears on the plan is it looks like there are large picture windows that are being added on the first floor, and obviously additional windows on the new second floor. Our property is immediately opposite on the second floor of Cranley House. I think that by bringing the balcony forward by that 1.5 or 2 meters, I'm not sure the exact amount, not only will it bring it within 10 meters of our property, but we'll be literally facing straight into that from our habitable rooms and our neighbours' habitable rooms directly into the opposite habitable rooms, much closer.
Which, with all due respect, is something that happens in London a lot. People are quite close across the street.
Historically, there have been some, but this is a new development. Obviously, it can be avoided.
Yeah, I mean, there are many instances all over London where windows are much closer than what is proposed here, I think.
But these are much larger windows and currently exist as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Councillor Woodger.
This is a question for the objectors. The applicant offered to potentially put in further planters on the balconies. Would that make any difference to you? Would that improve the application or not? Or any views on that from the objectors?
I'm not sure. Are there any on the north elevation?
Can I bounce that to the applicant if they? Sorry, can you clarify your comments?
Yeah, sure. We're talking about the rear terrace area, so there isn't any planters on the front. But could I answer the question about the building next to Green's Court? Because I think it is quite important that, you know, we did discuss this as part of the pre-application, and the design now incorporates a little kind of step back to allow the light to come through, which is why the design and access statement, the daylight and sunlight assessment considered that, and it does consider the impacts on Green's Court, and that's why it found that it wouldn't be an issue. If you, I don't know if Mr. Taylor has the design and access statement to hand, but figure 5.26 on page 49 is a really good illustration of how the building has been designed at the side of that balcony, which is being talked about at Green's Court. And it does replicate, obviously, on the other side of it. So the idea is kind of replicating the relationship of the buildings along the Muse with Green's Court either side. But it does have now like a step back, and the first floor obviously is forward on the building line, but the second floor is stepped back, so it doesn't go all the way up along the side of that balcony area. So light still does get into it, and the daylight and sunlight assessment did assess that and showed that light gets into that balcony area.
So, Mr. Warren, are you saying that at the level of Mr. Tett's flat, the front of the new proposed building does go straight up, but then above that it steps back?
So the building comes frontal on the building line,
yeah,
but it's not square along the balcony. There is an element of
yeah, we should be able to see this in plan view. There we are. So it appears from that as though the building is set back so that Mr. Tett's balcony gets its light, and then it comes forward sort of halfway across the building. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or is that a
That's not
second
right.
floor level
That's
area?
not right. No, that's not right. The flank wall, left-hand side flank wall, comes right to the end of our balcony. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
That our balcony is, if you look at the left-hand flank wall, the dark one, you have to go back about a metre on my side to get to our building line. And actually that's excessive, because the agent here said that he's bookended Green's Court, and that means that there's going to be a flank wall coming out the side of our balcony, and we will lose the sunlight, because about 4 o'clock, when the sun comes around, it's much lower in the sky, and so we miss all the light. There's no two ways about it.
Sorry, the plan which was shown was the second floor plan, which is why it didn't show. So, but if you look on that existing front elevation, it does come out, but you can see the top of the first floor is above the balcony, but it doesn't go all the way up to the eaves of Green's Court. So sun can still get through over the top of that floor. And just to add to that, there is like a little step back, so it's not a complete flank wall with a right angle there. It kind of zigzags. It's a detail within the brickwork, which we proposed following comments on this issue at the pre-application stage.
Right, I think I understand. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any further questions for either of the parties? Councillor Schmetterling, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. First, for the applicant, I appreciate what you've said about trying to adjust to the objectors' issues. I must say, for what looks like not a huge development, I don't think I've ever seen so many objections to it. I appreciate. Sorry, my throat's going. I think some of it may be fear of what might happen, rather than what will happen. But on the other hand, there's a lot there, and I think I found the picture that Ms. Rowan was talking about, which is an aerial view showing the distance across the road and behind. And the distance is already below suggested 18 metres. I'm sure that happens quite a lot. But the objection also prepared by professional people is that the distance between windows will go down further. So I'm just wondering what you could do about it. For example, frosted windows or screens of some sort. Sorry if I missed it, if you mentioned it before. I'm going to ask the objectors in a minute, but I'd like to hear your views first.
Well, the first point to mention is, we're continuing the building line, and those distances are the same at the moment for Clarendon Road.
Sorry, could you speak into the microphone?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Now better, yeah.
All right, okay. So the relationship is like that now with the Clarendon Road side windows, which face into Cranley. So we were only following the building line. So, we are replicating what is already a situation there. What we could look at is the slide-in screens perhaps on some of the windows, and that's what we've suggested to the rear as well. If as a way of providing further screening, I suppose, of the to add to the privacy of the units.
Well, things like screens, if it's timber, they can easily be removed. So it's got to be something that's more permanent. Plus, at least one of the objectors has raised the point of sunlight, a lot of sunlight being lost. I mean, that's roofline and walls.
So the screens which we're talking about are those kind of sliding screens which you get in front of windows. It's like shutters. So they're not, just kind of trellises on the outside. And the daylight sunlight, we reiterate that we've done a daylight sunlight assessment of this, which shows that the level of daylight is acceptable, and that's obviously been scrutinised by officers and the relevant people within the council, and they accept that.
Thanks. Could I ask now the objectors?
Michelle Rowan from Holland.
Yeah, it was you who pointed out. Can I just ask, have you heard what the applicant said about screening and so on? Would you like to comment on that?
Basically, we've heard historically that it often goes below the 18-metre distance in Kensington, Chelsea. After showing this development to the chair of the Ladbroke Association, 3 councillors, they have said, we have a case, this is too close. 5 metres, 8 metres is too close. Whatever screening they put up, it's too close. The developers keep saying there are no habitable rooms on the back of Clarendon Road. There are actually 2, 4 and 8 have already written to the council saying our bedrooms are on the back and this is going to look directly into our bedrooms. So don't say there's no habitable rooms, because there are. We're talking about 21 properties with habitable rooms being directly looked into from a very small distance. And no, we're not interested in screens. We're interested in this development being done in a way that considers the residents who live there. Simple as that.
Thanks very much. So what would your alternative be that's possible within conditions?
We did present the developers with a number of alternatives, both all of which were turned down out of hand. We first of all saw Edward Witch and said, look, you've got 2 Muse houses there, make them 2 great Muse houses, nice Muse houses, gardens at the back. He said no. We said turn the development around so the amenity spaces aren't 5 metres from people's bedrooms but face the Muse like all other amenity spaces on the Muse. Screen it off from Clarendon with some trees or a living wall. He said no. The Ladbroke Association asked him to take 1 unit down off the top floor on the west side so that Melanie at number 8 is not looking at a brick wall. He said no. Everything we've asked them to do to work with us, they've been intractable. We've been told this is how it's going to be, this is how it's going to be.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I have just one further question for Mr. Ted. Your flat, sir, does that go up the full height of Greens Court?
Sorry, but the house is number 12 Greens Court, yeah.
Yeah. Is it the full height? Do you go up to the gabled roof there?
Hang on, I don't know whether they follow it. Yeah, they live in the whole thing. It's a house built at first floor level.
I see.
So what's happened is that the ground floor level is car parking and the garage and the shops and all that. And the first floor level, they built 12 houses there. And you have to go through a door at the bottom. You go up some stairs. You go into a courtyard, and their houses that face onto Holland Park Avenue, and the houses face onto the Lansdowne Muse.
Yeah,
we are the one nearest the development.
I understand. So it's 1 room of yours that will be affected.
It will. It's mine that's going to be affected directly with the sunlight. And also this could be remedied by just bringing the building line of the new block back to the building line of the residential accommodation of Greens Court and reducing the flats down from about 790 square feet to about 725. Instead of making them 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom, you've made them 2 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and from my point of view, that it will work.
Yeah. But it is just that 1 large window on the first floor that will be affected by this flank wall.
It is it's the light on my balcony. Yeah, it's a light. It is the sunlight on my balcony.
Yeah. I certainly see that it's going to block quite a lot of the western light to your balcony. Yeah. And if I could just ask Mr. Warren about the suggestion there made by Mr. Tett, is it possible to take the line of the building back? I appreciate we couldn't do it by way of condition in this meeting, but is it feasible?
I'm not sure. It's a question for the architect, really, but I know we've looked at this previously, and one of the reasons why we kind of grappled with the kind of scale of units was to balance out the frontage to the Muse, which was important from kind of the heritage officer's point of view. and also to create the size of units which was capable of meeting the standards.
I suppose one could have slightly fewer units in the building and therefore slightly bigger units.
I think that affects the viability, though.
We often hear about viability in this committee. Okay, Councillor Schmetling.
Just for the applicant, to Mr. Warner, you heard Ms. Rowan's comments about not engaging to the extent that they were talking about. What's your response to that here in public?
Well, we sent out flyers and received 4 emails. We offered to meet Mr. and Mrs. Rowan at that point, which for whatever reason was not taken up. I understand that she has met with the client, but I have not been party to any of those discussions.
Thanks very much. Okay, I think we'll move on from this stage, and thank you to the agent and all the objectors and Councillor Lindsay, and we will now see if there are any questions from the committee to the officers. Councillor Woodger.
Thanks. Just a question about number of bedrooms. So I think I've got the calculations right. I think it's 10 bedrooms that you'd have. You've got 1 studio, one bedroom, and then 4 2-bedroom flats. So that's 10 beds, if I got that right. The existing Muses, how many bedrooms do those each have?
Yeah, that sounds about right, Chairman. I'd go for 6.
So existing, each Muse has how many bedrooms?
3 each.
3 bedrooms.
So you go from overall 6, okay, 6 to 10. So that's an increase. I guess my main question is sort of balancing of number of units versus family housing. Because obviously the existing 2 Muses have, as I keep saying, 3 bedrooms each, which is, if you look at council policy in terms of we should value that type of housing, we have less of it in the borough. How do we marry that up with having a sheer number of higher units? So this will deliver more units of housing, but obviously overall they're smaller. How do we balance that up?
Well, at this scale, it's rather difficult to do that. Obviously, the constraints of the site are going to be the single biggest constraining factor in terms of what can actually be provided there. I mean, paragraph 6.2 of the report sort of discusses that to a point and then points out that there has to be some flexibility, particularly in view of the constraints of the site. So it's a matter of balancing the number of dwellings, I suppose, against the mix of dwellings.
So is the number of dwellings valued more than the type of dwelling, is what you're telling me?
No, I think both have to be taken into account. I mean, there's no, that it certainly is not the objective to chase numbers alone. I mean, the number of dwellings obviously satisfies targets, but the number of dwellings is only one point. I mean, the type of dwelling, the suitability of the site for a type of dwelling.
So the net positive is minor, is what I'm kind of getting from that, essentially. It does provide more housing slightly, but slightly less family housing.
Yes, but it would provide, obviously, additional homes.
Yeah. Okay, that was my main question.
Councillor Baxter.
Mr. Taylor, I presume we have daylight and sunlight reports, and I'm sure you have assessed this, but according to this gentleman, he's going to lose entire sunlight. Did you assess that, and you still recommended for this application to be approved this evening? Could you explain, please? And the conditions they mentioned, in my view, is not we can't implement it bigger than a condition. We need to refuse the application if we listen to them.
I suggest probably that sort of the discussion of conditions would be towards the end of this assessment. In terms of daylight and sunlight, yes, that the applicants submitted a formal daylight and sunlight study that identified the properties surrounding the site and the effect upon those. In terms of the formal study, that there are only 2 windows that would actually fall slightly short of the standard. In the worst case scenario, that one window would lose 27% of its vertical sky component, but that's a window to a kitchen, which is, it's not totally discounted, but it's given a very sort of low rating in the sunlight guide, the daylight guidelines. In terms of balconies, it's even more difficult to apply the sun and daylight study, because the sun and daylight guidelines, the British Research Establishment guidelines, focus upon either plots of land or habitable rooms. They don't focus upon balconies. So in BRE terms, in terms of the sun and daylight guidelines, the development actually complies with the guidelines. The balcony that we're talking about that would lose sunlight, it's not so much an infringement of the guidelines, but it's still obviously a material consideration. I mean, the balcony clearly does get some sunshine from the southwest or the west at the moment. And that it's not really an infringement of the daylight guidelines, but the balcony would lose that sunlight. So it's still a material consideration.
What conditions could we prepare to attach to this application to accommodate the objectors' concerns?
In terms of the balcony, to deal with the balcony, in other words, to alter the development in a way that would not reduce sunlight to that balcony, the development would have to take a different form. So that would be way outside the scope of planning conditions. In terms of the rear, planning conditions could require additional screens. That's potentially something a condition could do, but not in terms of remodelling the development. So if you're talking about bringing back building lines or anything of that nature, that would be well outside planning conditions.
And finally, this 18-meter rule, this is one of the policies. Does it apply when the buildings are facing each other on the other side of the road?
Well, the 18-meter rule, first of all, it's obviously a yardstick. The idea is that in an ideal world, that would be the minimum distance between 2 opposing windows. In reality, in a densely built-up area, it's very difficult to achieve anything like that sort of distance. If you think of a typical Kensington Muse, a Muse would be probably 9 or 10 metres in width. So clearly you've got lots of situations where there are lines of residential windows facing each other at much less than that. But all of that said, obviously the degree of change in any situation is what needs to be assessed. And I mean, the balancing act that's necessary here is obviously, in this case, at the moment, the buildings coexist at a slightly greater distance. And it's obviously the degree of change that's the key to this.
That's very helpful, I think. Thank you. Councillor Schmetling.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor. Just following on about the distances, I think the thing here is, I appreciate, first of all, that obviously in a lot of places their buildings are much closer, facing each other much less than 18 metres. But what we have here is where it's already a lot less in some cases, and there's a further reduction, as in this objection by the company UPP says it's going from 13.5 to 12 metres, which may not seem a lot, but when you've got only 13.5 goes down, lose another 1.5, that's quite significant. And on the second floor, there wasn't a problem, and it's going to just have 9.8 metres separation. That strikes me as difficult. If you move into a property and know the circumstances, then that's a different thing to living in a place for a long time, or not such a long time, whatever, and then having this thing stuck in front of your face. That's, to me, that's a big difference. What do you think? I mean, isn't that a consideration? A planning consideration, even?
Yes, I mean, I'd completely agree with you. In the case of a new development where everyone's moving in together, or, you know, within a short space of time, that certainly distances could be tolerated in a way that are much harder to tolerate when you've lived somewhere for a long time. I mean, that's very true.
Well, if there are no further questions to Mr. Taylor, I think that section of the meeting can conclude, and we can discuss amongst ourselves, colleagues, what our views are on this.
Facing his conditions, what conditions would you like to attach to this application?
On the hypothesis that we were to
If we were minded to, yes.
Yeah. Have you got any suggestions, Councillor Bactel? Well, actually, maybe should we come to conditions in a second once we've worked out what the view of the committee is, roughly speaking, or if there are any points that people want to make before revealing their hand in a vote. Councillor Woodger.
I can reveal my hand if you want. I think for me, the relative benefits of additional housing are not as much as I thought when we went into the details in terms of the type of housing. But I do think it is of architectural merit. I think it is actually an improvement on the building that's there. It's a shame in terms of the encroachment, but unfortunately this is central London. It's very hard to get new development without any encroachment at all. So it's hard. It's all about relative harm, but I think there is just about a benefit for this going in. So I would vote in favour.
Okay, I think that's a very helpful summary. As Councillor Woodger says, we are gaining additional housing units, which is strongly supported in policy. We're going from 2 to 6. However, they're quite small, and there are some distinct drawbacks of this proposal. So we have to weigh, as decision makers in the planning balance, how those two things weigh up against each other, and other factors as well as those two things. Councillor Durian.
If I almost picture the proposed design in my mind on its own, without its context, I think a perfectly acceptable, generic, contemporary design. But the moment you put it there into its context within the buildings that flank it on all sides, we then have the series of problems which we've discussed at length. I think the applicant has acknowledged to some extent as well. So I guess the question is, as Councillor Woodger says, do we believe all those issues, rather the suggested enhancement to the conservation area, which I'm doubtful about, I suppose, but if we were to think, okay, in strict architectural terms, it is an improvement on what's currently there. If we were to take that and the fact that we have increased numbers of units, do those two things really outweigh all of the harm that's caused to the surrounding buildings? I'm tending to think possibly not. Possibly not. And there's another angle which I think we haven't discussed actually, is the waste management aspect of this as well, given that we are increasing the numbers of units, but there doesn't appear to be sort of adequate waste management on the building. I think that's an extra sort of angle to consider as well. So I'm feeling that on balance I would vote against. But I'd like to hear what others think as well.
Yeah, that's a point well made by the Ladbroke Association, I think, about waste management. They think there's insufficient in the building. Councillor Schmetling.
Well, my forerunners have put the pluses and the minuses. It is very difficult. Architecturally, I think it will be fine, but I just have a feeling about this that it's difficult, and I'm inclined to not be very happy about it in terms of the effect it'll have on the neighbouring properties, even though I would welcome an increase in units, because of course we need them badly, and this would be maybe not in the number of beds, but the number of units would be a noticeable increase. But I just feel that it's going to be very tough on the neighbours, and something's going to be slung in their face, as it were, and cut out some sunlight. I appreciate there was a report done, but I feel that, as I think Mr. Taylor indicated, it didn't cover everything because the BRE doesn't cover everything. So that's my current thinking. Thank you.
I suppose one thing one has to weigh up is whether, if we were to refuse it, if the applicant went to appeal, or if the applicant were to come back with a bigger scheme still. This might be the least worst option. But Councillor Bactel, you've been very helpful on the subject of conditions. If we were minded to approve it, have you got some conditions in mind that you think might make it
No,
acceptable?
the reason I mentioned the conditions, I literally mentioned that multiple times in this meeting, because we need to balance things. But the very main question for me is the concerns the objectors have cannot be fixed with a condition. It's larger than this. I do understand the developer or the applicant must have a financial viability. Financial viability is a key in here. But we have a bunch of people been living there peacefully. Now, next year, they will have a big building in front of them, ruining their lives. So I know it's 6 flats proposed in here, but if it was a bit lower, maybe another story. So all sides will be benefiting from this. So overall, I think we can't attach any conditions to accommodate our objectors' concerns in here.
Well, for my part, I struggle with the front elevation. I hadn't appreciated how discordant it is with Green's Court next door. I'm far less persuaded by the concerns over the distances between the balconies and windows, as I think I indicated. That happens all over London, and especially in Kensington and Chelsea, where we all live fairly cheek by jowl. But I am concerned about this point at the front. Can we have one more look, Mr. Taylor, at the front elevation, please, as proposed?
Although that says existing, that's actually the proposed.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm afraid, Mr. Tet, that part of the meeting is over.
Right, okay.
I'm afraid you're not able to speak any longer.
Chairman, but that is the existing front elevation.
Right.
Then that's the proposed front elevation.
And again. So I think it's fair to say that the brickwork as existing comes up about the level of the balustrade that we can see on Mr. Tett's balcony, and as proposed, I think comes up, I saw in a helpful annotation of one of the plans, 15 courses of brickwork higher, which I think is 1125 millimeters. So for me, that's an issue there, but it's 1.1 meters of additional brickwork. It is going to cause some loss of sunlight to we've had total loss of sunlight in Mr. Tett's view to his balcony, but on the other hand, we do get 4 additional housing units and a considerably improved, in my view, building to what's there at the moment. Okay, well, I think we've canvassed it fairly thoroughly. As Councillor Bakhtiar says, there are no conditions that would really address the objectors' concerns, so it comes down to our vote. Unless there's anything else from anyone, we shall move to a vote. So the recommendation is that the committee authorises the Director of Planning and Place to grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking or agreement to secure the matters in section 7 of this report and with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. And I'm going to come to each of you in turn and ask how you vote. Councillor Woodger.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Schratling.
Against.
Councillor Durian. Councillor Bakhtiar.
Against, Chair.
And I'm in favour. So that is not carried, that motion. So we now have to come up with a motion for why planning permission is being refused. And you three who were against, do you want to help, Mr. Taylor?
I think harm to the neighbours, daylight, sunlight, and the harm to the appearance and the bulk and the size of the building.
Bulk, scale and massing.
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor, you may want to help us on a possible motion for why the committee's refused permission, is refusing permission.
Well, I think a little bit of clarification might still be needed. I mean, to encapsulate those aspects, but obviously sunlight is a discrete thing in its own right. Sense of enclosure is the result of scale and massing upon living conditions. But then the scale and massing also relates to townscape. So I think you'd need to be clear as to, if you're talking about scale and massing, whether your concerns about scale and massing in townscape terms or in terms of sense of enclosure. Or both, of course.
Sense of enclosure, I think overlooking is another key one. I would also talk about the distances as well. I know that 18 metres has been brought up. It's a little bit of a red herring because you're nowhere near that in the first place, but it still doesn't materially reduce the separation between habitable rooms as well. So I think those are all points that I'd like to see covered.
Perhaps I should have actually said overlooking is another discrete aspect. In a sense.
Does that give you enough, Mr. Taylor, for a motion for refusal?
The committee needs to decide how many of townscape, sense of enclosure, privacy, and sunlight to the balcony. So they're all four things that you've discussed. So the committee needs to decide how many.
I think on this, Councillor, back to your issue, I would omit the townscape one. I think the other three are the top priorities for the motion.
So the motion for refusal might be that the committee refuses permission on the basis of Mr. Taylor to fill in the gaps.
Overlooking, privacy and loss of sunlight.
At the moment, different members of the committee are saying slightly different things. So it clearly could be all of those, but so just to run through the list, privacy, sense of enclosure, sunlight, and then townscape.
Okay, does anyone want townscape as part of the motion for refusal? Or is it privacy, loss of light and overlooking?
Privacy, loss of light and overlooking.
That includes the fact that it's already a small distance which is going to be reduced in some cases. So that's covered by overlooking, presumably.
Essentially, that's privacy and sense of enclosure.
Yeah, so that's covered by two of them. Okay, so the motion for refusal is that the committee refuses permission on the grounds of privacy, loss of light and overlooking. And could I please hear how you vote? Imagine it'll be the opposite of how you voted previously, but Councillor Bakhtiar, you're in favour of the motion for refusal. Councillor Durian?
Agrees.
Agreed. Councillor Woodger? And I'm against. So planning permission is refused on the grounds that we've just discussed. And thank you all very much for coming. So we now move to item number 2 on the agenda, which is the first of the two Hornton Street applications. And is that Mr. Taylor again?
Yes, if you just bear with me, I've got to move the slides very slowly.
Okay, that's all right.
They tend to flicker.
So to allow the objectors to the previous motion to leave.
Right, shall I start, Chair?
Please do.
So there are two applications concerning number 56 to 58 Hornton Street, and this is the first of them. So the first one deals with the alteration to a rear chimney, which allows the bulking out of the roof just behind it. And to orientate you, that's actually a photograph taken 2 years ago, I think, from the town hall, in fact. Which gives a very useful perspective down onto the application building. And the blue arrow there indicates the chimney in question. So if you can see at the moment, the house basically has two chimney stacks, to be accurate. One chimney stack is towards the left-hand side, and then one is where the blue arrow is at the back on the northeast side of the property. And in terms of the front elevation, you can see there that the right-hand or easternmost chimney stack in the front elevation. In terms of the front elevation, the stack won't really change. But it's on the side that the stack could change. So if you can see there the hatched area, I mean, essentially that shows the existing stack to the left, and then it would be extended to the tune of the hatched area that you see there. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That was very brief. And we now have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Lopinier and possibly Mrs. Apkarin, the applicant. The way this works is because this is recommended for refusal, we are able to hear from those speaking against the recommendation. So, Mr. Lopinier, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say a little bit about the building itself and how it relates to its context, and that will be common to both these presentations. And then I'll deal with the specifics of the chimney. So the building itself, it's described in the conservation area as idiosyncratic. It has its own design and appearance, and it contrasts pleasantly with the more classical Georgian and Victoria buildings that you see in the rest of the conservation area. There was an application to Georgianise the building in 2016, and the committee felt no, one should keep the quirky nature of this building and its contribution. It was in fact built as an extension to the adjoining building and therefore has some very constrained internal spaces within it. So I'll now turn to why we want to extend the rear chimney. It's to do with a very narrow space within the building that is a corridor effectively between two bedrooms of about 1 metre in width, and this proposal would increase that to about 1.8 metres. As it said, it proposed to extend the building or the chimney by 2.2 metres. As you'll note that it's been designed as a chimney with a capping stone and chimney pot. I think it could actually have another chimney pot. But this is my point, that I don't think it causes any harm. It's set back from the rear of the adjacent building. It's 5.5 metres back from the rear of the building that we're talking about. It's 3.6 metres back from the mansard roof, and therefore it's very recessive, sitting between these two roof slopes. There are no views from the public realm. There are very limited views from any private properties. The building at the back, 60 Hornton Street, has trees, and it would anyway seen as a very recessive form with 5.5 metre distance from the leading edge of the building. From Holland Street properties, as I say, it doesn't protrude beyond the building line, and there might be some very acute angles, but very limited. And it's very instructive that there's been huge opposition to what has happened to this building over time. There is no opposition from any local resident or amenity society to this proposal. So in my view, it doesn't cause any material harm, and there are some benefits from the internal rearrangements.
Thank you very much. Are we hearing from Mrs. Apkarin?
Good evening, councillors. I sit here not just as a homeowner, but as a mother and of three and a wife. I'm also embarrassed I'm here for the fourth time. Our love for this house started in 2014. We bought a dilapidated blue-black building with a magnificent music room of Sir Stanford. We made a personal commitment to restore this room, a room that takes 75% of the footprint and can only be used for special occasions. Every architect told us that we were crazy, the house is not listed, and to allocate this room for a different space. But we turned them down, not to have a kitchen or a family room. This is why our painful 7-year journey, we've never asked to demolish this house, despite in 2016 the design officer telling us that they would grant consent for the application. Today we're in front of you not because we're doing something that is highly visible or takes away from somebody's amenities. We're here because we would like to extend a chimney that is invisible from the street or from neighbors, but it provides us with much needed internal space and head height. I want to tell you the background to this request, to tell you why we need this space, and for you to understand that if a minor amendment can't be seen, if it does not take anything away from anyone, and if it is helpful to the occupant, then why should it not be approved? I look forward to moving into this home and occupying it with my family to create memories, notwithstanding the torturous journey that we have lost of 7 years and that we won't get back. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And yes, I appreciate there's a complicated history to this property. I think we have to put that aside in our deliberations this evening and just assess this on the planning merits. But I do understand that it's been a difficult journey for you. Colleagues, do you have any questions for either Mr. Lotbiniere or Mrs. Akkarin? Yeah, several. Councillor Bakhtiar, first of all.
This is for the applicant. Reading from the objection letters, I noticed two objectors mentioning that bifolding doors were not previously approved in that application, and the other one saying that the doors facing the neighboring properties seem to be not in compliance, a matter of privacy. Could you answer those, please?
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
Sorry?
We think you might be talking about the next case, Councillor Bakhtiar. All right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about different
90
one altogether.
Yeah, it's attached to this. Oh, is it? I'm sorry. Apologies.
Anyone else? Councillor Woodger, I think you had a question.
Well, my question was mainly, is the purpose of the increase in the chimney more to have the increasing the chimney, or is it more to do with the extension? I mean, what's the balance of the purpose of this application?
I mean, the main aim is to create better internal space, but do it in a way that is as sympathetic as you can do it, so that it reads as a chimney, so the design approach that we've come up with is designed to do this in the most sensitive way that one can.
So, in raw terms, you would be happy with just the extension and without the actual chimney?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't quite catch that.
So my question is, well, you've answered the first one, which is the main objective is the extension, as opposed to the chimney. So if you just got the extension but without the chimney, you would be satisfied.
Are you talking about the mansard roof? Because we're only at the moment we're just dealing with the chimney.
Although we've just found out that that's the purpose of the chimney.
Well, no, I think maybe they're saying that the expanding the chimney allows an internal passage
enables
to become a bit wider.
Yeah.
To get from 1 metre to 1.9 metres, is that right? Or?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So it becomes, instead of a very narrow space, it becomes a usable space within the building.
And is it to this room that will be slightly expanded in the mansard that we're coming to deal with next?
It will be, yeah. I mean, it's capable of being implemented in either scenario, but clearly, actually the image that was shown didn't show the consented change to the mansard, because there was already consented change, and the application about to come before you is a change to that consented mansard shape. So this is a minor material amendment to a scheme that already has an extension and changes to the mansard in the building, and so that's why it's hidden even more than as you look down on it.
It's hidden between the approved Mansard and will be even slightly more hidden if you approve the next one.
I see, yeah.
Sorry, it's complicated because it's a minor material amendment to an existing permission. That's why I think it's maybe a bit difficult to understand it. And it's not looking at the building as it is at the moment, because it's already got that consent, and that's the consent that we're changing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay, it is a bit troubling, I think, possibly to dress up a widened passage internally as a chimney.
Well, the chimney stack itself will be above the link, so the link will be, if you like, below the capping stone and the detailing of that chimney. So that will be the thing that you see, and the chimney. I think actually you could put another chimney pot on, because it looks more appropriate as a row of chimney pots, as you see all around the area actually. Not quite a big gap between one pot and the other, but the infill will be below the capping stone of that chimney.
Have we got something that illustrates this better, Mr. Taylor? Because I'm slightly confused. Others maybe. It strikes me we're being asked to approve what would become a very large chimney, and I suppose that's helpful. That drawing you've got there, that elevation you've got there. So it's alongside the Mansard, but by taking the chimney rearwards on the building, twice as much as the existing size of the chimney, I mean, making it 3 times as big, roughly. It's allowing a passage which presumably runs alongside the Mansard, sort of fore and aft, as it were, to become wider. Is that right? Yeah.
So there's a chimney at the front, and then there is you see almost a wall that links between the 2 chimney stacks, and it's the second chimney stack at the rear that's being extended rearwards. Yeah. And what you see there is the profile of the consented Mansard behind it, which is about 3.6 meters beyond it, and 5.5 meters to the rear elevation. So that's why I say it sticks. It sits within these roofs and doesn't protrude in a way that would be visually harmful. And there is a principle: if something doesn't cause harm, then there's a presumption in favour of planning consent being granted. And so that's what we say and what we believe in the context of this particular proposal.
Okay, well, we might discuss that with officers in a second, but can we go back to the town hall view, please, Mr. Taylor? So, just to be clear, the consented Mansard that Mr. Lobinier is telling us about will bring that rear roof on what I'm calling the back of the building quite a bit higher.
That's correct, yes. And it has dormer windows in it. Three dormer windows.
The town hall facing Horton Street.
Yeah.
Dormer windows. Yeah. And I think we saw from the previous drawing that the top of the Mansard, I don't know whether it's got a flat top or a ridge.
It's a true Mansard, so it has a lower upper slope.
Right.
But it's different. That is the Mansard's in 2 sections. Yeah. It's the north. This is the. Yeah.
It's the north bit. Okay. Yeah. So the ridge of the rear Mansard on the rear bit of the building comes to the same height as the proposed capping stone on the expanded chimney, I think.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when seen from Horton Street, you wouldn't see it as visibly as one might think.
No, and I think that's accepted by the planning officers, that you wouldn't. It's not visible from the public realm.
It is, however, visible from the private spaces on Peel Street, is it? Pitt Street, and Gordon Place, I dare say.
Well, it would be obviously there's a lot of trees in the intervening. Those houses sit higher, looking down on it, and the leading edge that they would see of that chimney is 5.5 meters back from the edge of the building itself. So it's well recessed, and it's also behind the ridge of the adjacent building in Holland Street. But if you look at some of the runs of chimneys in the area, they are 4 meters, 4.3 meters, and so the actual depth of this chimney is not something which is untypical in these sort of areas.
What is the proposed depth?
I'm talking about this sort of
front to
length
back.
of it.
Yeah,
yes,
length.
it's I think it's 4 meters. Or 3.6 meters from 3.6, yeah.
Front to back,
yeah.
North to south, as it were. And you're saying there are, I mean, possibly even we might be able to see one there. What's that big white chimney?
That's probably not quite 4 meters, but they're on the other side of the street. And then on this side of the street, where you've got those very, very, very tall Mansard roof extensions and an architecture that is different. You'll see there chimney stacks, which will be at least 4 meters, if not longer. So, but I think the main point here is that, yes, I don't think the length is atypical, but it's really the fact that it's not visible. And as a piece of architecture, it's designed to look like a chimney stack. I mean, we often do this with plant on top of a building. We try not to look like a big piece of plant, but try and use an architectural device which is common to a conservation area. And so, yes, you could say it's a bit of a fake, but it's giving the, it's giving a visual impression that is comfortable to someone looking at it.
Mm.
But I think you can also see the trees in the back there between Pitt Street and the back of this building. So it is very heavily treed, as well as being a very recessed edge of the chimney extension.
Mm. Thank you. And Mrs. Apkarin, if we were not to grant this, how could you configure your space within the consented mansard to work without the wider passage?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, we've redesigned this house time and time again. It's for actually the 2 girls and the passageway in their bedroom. Their rooms are quite smaller. We lost a full floor since the council actually did grant us consent, but we lost at committee in 2016. We've really tried. We don't have that much space. I really want to keep this music room as a music room because I think it's a beautiful room, but I lose a lot of space. I don't want to turn that room into a kitchen and a family room and use the other space as the kids' bedrooms, because already I've put the kids upstairs. There's 3 children in that floor. It's quite small. It's not that big, but yet I've preserved a room because it has a blue plaque.
Okay, well, that's very helpful, and something to some extent we can take into account. Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions to either Mr. Lobinier or Mrs. Apkarin? Councillor Schmetling, I think.
I'd like to ask about the comments in the officer's report. The summary, it says to create a chimney of over 3.6 meters in length. First of all, I'm not sure what length means. I mean, I'm going to ask the officers about it later, but to get your opinion, I'm not sure what length is. There's a height and there's a width, isn't there? What's a length in a chimney?
It's a width. I think it's the width,
north to south,
or the depth. So when we were looking at those chimney on the photograph, it's the distance from one side
to the other. Okay, so all right. And it says to create over. Where's it going from? It doesn't say from. It just says to over. To 3.6 meters plus. But what is it now? Or what is the extant permission?
The chimney stack at the moment, because it will be 3.6, and it's a 2.2 extension, so it's 1.2 meters.
Increase. Oh, sorry.
It's a 2.2 increase, and it's a 1.2 meter at the moment.
As in the drawing.
Yes, as in that drawing out.
Okay. So it's from 1.2. Okay, and the second thing is
doesn't quite add up.
With a visible raised wall, which would cause the smaller boxed out extension approved with the next version to double in size, but from what to what? Do you know? I mean, you must know, presumably.
I'm not absolutely clear where it says double in size, because all it is extending the link between the two bedrooms, widening what is a very narrow passage from 1 meter to 1.8 meter. So I don't think it is doubling the space. Obviously, the mansard roof in itself adds a lot more space at the top, but I don't think this extended chimney stack is doubling the space.
As a matter of interest, is this chimney a working chimney actually?
The
decorative
the existing stack is, yeah.
It could work. It's a working chimney.
Yes, and part of it is still working chimney. It will still be a working chimney.
The existing bit, obviously.
Sorry?
The existing bit of the chimney.
Correct.
I think it's the existing. The extension won't be a working chimney, but it will have a chimney pot and the sort of the detailing of a chimney as in design terms.
Right, so it'll remain working at least in part, not the whole width. But the other thing I want to ask is, this is not subject to a current permission. It's not extant, is it? The chimney. You haven't had a width extension or a width increase already.
Not to that element, but we have to the obviously the mansard roof, as you've seen along Holland Street,
not the chimney
has changed significantly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. We can probably explore it in a second with officers, but it just occurs to me there might be some scope for compromise. I don't know whether it could be done within the framework of this application, but if the committee were minded in principle to agree to a chimney being expanded, but possibly not quite as much as proposed, would that work for you, Mrs. Atkarin?
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to ask my architects, because we've reworked the house so many times. Part of that hallway is also adding some storage for the girls' clothes, because their rooms are quite small. So I was using the hallway and just for folded clothes to be in that, and linen for the kids upstairs as part of planning, spatial planning. We're not affecting anybody. It's not seen by anybody. I don't know even why I'm here, but there's no objections.
No, I sympathise, but I think it is seen by some people, and we, council, have a duty to regulate development, as you'll understand, to make sure it's right. Colleagues, any further questions to Mr. Lobinier and Mrs. Atkarin? Otherwise, we'll discuss it with Mr. Taylor. And then we'll come back to them on the next application in a second. Okay, I'm afraid, Mr. Atkarin, you can't. Mr. Taylor, you're probably going to tell me that we can only consider the application before us, but is there any scope for saying we sympathise to some extent, we wouldn't mind a slightly larger chimney, but not one that's 3.6 metres long?
I think you've probably guessed my answer. I mean, it would be possible, certainly, to add a condition if you're minded to grant to reserve the detail of the chimney pots. I think if you were minded to grant...
That was the next thing I was going to come to, chimney
pots. to actually make it look like a chimney.
Yeah.
I think chimney pots could actually go a long way to making it look like a chimney as opposed to a wall. So chimney pots, yes, you could do, but I don't think you could really change the dimension of the chimney through condition.
Okay, I thought you might say that, but worth exploring. Okay, colleagues. Other questions to Mr. Taylor? Councillor Schmetterling.
I've obviously read the detailed, fairly detailed. Well, actually, on this occasion, not so many comments. The other one's got lots of planning officer comments. But does it really matter? I mean, I know it's written there that it matters, which is why you've recommended refusal. But the truth is, does it really matter? Does it really affect the area, the environment around there, for the sake of what? And if you add the chimney pots, the decorative chimney pots, which is possibly a easy thing to do, not expensive particularly, would it really make it acceptable?
Well, ultimately, obviously, that's a decision you're going to have to reach.
Yeah.
I mean, to summarise it, I mean, you can see the view expressed in the report of officers is that a chimney of that scale would be wrong for the building, it would be overscaled for the building. On the other hand, it's also true that it wouldn't be seen from the street in any direction, and it would only be seen at the rear from quite some distance. So you just have to piece those things together. I mean, it's it is overscaled for the building, but equally there are chimneys obviously in the vicinity that are as long as that.
Thank you, because the building, as described, is quirky, so I'm not sure, what its environment is. It's nice in its own way, isn't it? And if you make an adjustment like that, it's still going to be quirky, which is, the colour obviously adds to it, but anyone can repaint it, I suppose. But it just retains its quirkiness, won't it? It might have a wide chimney stack, but so what?
The wide chimney stack could obviously be quirky, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
so you do accept, Mr. Taylor, that there are other chimneys as big as this or bigger in the vicinity?
Yes, yeah, there certainly are. I mean, to be fair, if you look at the aerial photograph, even on that side of Holland Street, I can see two chimney stacks there that would be comparable in scale to the one that's proposed here.
Yeah, and Mr. Lobinier made an interesting point that I hadn't really thought of, that if this were an aircon unit or something like that, we'd probably be saying, yes, okay, you can put it behind some wooden housing, so some housing or something for an aircon unit up at roof level. We allow people to disguise things like that, plant at roof level. So that's an interesting point, I thought.
Could we ask the applicant, Chair, if they would accept just decorative chimney pots? I mean, possibly though. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks. And we could potentially, if we were minded to grant, as Mr. Taylor said, reserve chimney pots by condition for discussion with officers. Councillor Woodger.
My question to officers is, how often do we get, I guess, fake chimney applications? Is this quite a common thing, quite rare?
I couldn't say it's common, but I have seen fake chimneys before, and I've seen them done quite well. I mean, to work, it has to look like a chimney, obviously. But yes, I have seen it done, but I wouldn't say it's common. But it's not that uncommon.
This is being done by Donald Insel Associates, very reputable.
May I comment on? I remember the other week we had an application somewhere else in the borough, obviously, where we were discussing whether there should be whether it's necessary to have a chimney or not. So that's another one of those. I can't remember what the outcome was, but the point was, it was a discussion about, if you want to call it that, a fake chimney.
Yeah, we added a chimney there, I think.
We added one because it made it look better, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, colleagues, I think we've done that, not quite to death, but we've spent a bit of time on it. So any further points that you'd like to make or discussion you'd like to have between us before we move to a vote? Vote. Okay. The view is a vote. And the recommendation is that the committee refuses planning permission for the reason given. I'm not going to read it out, but it's there in the report. Let's check I'm talking about the right one, not the Mansard. Yes, application 07919. And Councillor Bakhtiar, how do you vote? Against the recommendation?
Against the recommendation.
Okay. Councillor Durian? Okay.
I'm against the recommendation.
Councillor Woodger?
To grant.
So you're against the recommendation? Yeah, and I'm actually also against the recommendation. I've been persuaded during the course of the committee. So we now need to come up with a reason for why we're voting against the recommendation. Is that right? We need a motion to grant. That's right. Mr. Lomas.
Chairman, you need to discuss any conditions that you think are appropriate to.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so conditions, the obvious one I think is chimney pots, to reserve chimney pots, I suggest, to be agreed between officers and the applicant. So details of chimney pots to be reserved by condition. And then do we need to give reasons for our granting? Like we would the obverse of what we do when we're refusing, or we just vote in favour? Okay, so the motion is to grant.
Sorry, Chairman, if I could just buzz in and say, in terms of conditions, so obviously we've got that additional condition. As this is a Section 73 application, if you could delegate to officers the bringing across of other conditions from the parent permission to this one, because this would. It's a technical thing, but under Section 73, the parent planning permission will have conditions that need to be brought across to this. But if you could delegate that authority to officers, then.
So, because this is a Section 73, which is a variation of condition application, as Mr. Taylor says, there are conditions attached to the parent application, to which this is itself a condition, that need to be brought across to this grant of permission for this expanded chimney, effectively. I think that's right in sort of almost layman's terms. So the recommendation is therefore to grant what the applicants are seeking. And Councillor Bakhtiar, how do you vote?
I am in favour of granting, but I want to start to say to the officers, we still love you. We disagree, but we still love you.
Thank you, Councillor Bakhtiar. I'm sure officers are reassured. Councillor Durian. Yeah.
Well, I'm in favour of granting, but the condition of the chimney pots
with the
to be discussed with officers.
Yeah, the condition reserved.
Granted with chimney pots.
Yeah, and I am the same, also to grant permission. So that is therefore what the applicant's wish is granted there. And we move to the Mansard roof alteration. Again, it's a Section 73 variation of condition application. And Mr. Taylor.
So yes, this is another Section 73 application. The first slide you've seen already. I'll draw attention not to the chimney but to the roof. So obviously this is the existing building. And if you note there that there's a mansard roof section on the southern part of the building, and then the northern part of the building in the photograph obviously just has a pitched roof with a central ridge. Under the planning permission that's been granted, the mansard that you see there is effectively extended back across most of the building. So the next image that I'll show you is basically that I've got another one that shows in better detail, but that's the south elevation. So you can see there the context with Holland Street beside it. That's a closer up image, and what you can see there is the approved mansard. If you can see the blue dotted line. I wish I had a red mouse, a red cursor indicator, but if you can see my cursor there, the blue dotted line is basically the existing permission, and then the black line, the solid line, is the proposal in front of you now. So you can see it gets slightly steeper, and then the knuckle points at the side where the two slopes join, that gets slightly higher. And in terms of the elevation, you can see there the extended roof that I was just describing, which is in the planning permission. And then if you look at the northern end of that, the left-hand end, you can see the blue dotted line is the profile of the existing planning permission. And then the black line that you see above it, again, so it's just slightly steeper and slightly taller. That's the proposal before you this evening. An important point to point out is that the actual upper part of the roof doesn't increase. This is to do with the sides and their angle, not to do with the actual top height. So you can see the top height there is consistent. And that's the last slide.
Thank you very much. Well, very assiduous and honest of the applicants to bring this application at all. Some might say that you barely noticed the change of clothes, but colleagues, we now have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Lobinier and Mrs. Apkarian on this point.
Right, I won't say too much about the building because I've described its idiosyncratic and quirky nature, and you see that very much from the front elevation there. Mansard roofs been around a long time, since 1600 when Mr. Mansard, with a T, designed them. They're now called mansards, but their characteristics are typically set behind a parapet, which it is, steeper lower slope, minimum of normally 70, which it is, flatter top, which it is, dormer windows appropriately placed within the slope of the window, which I believe it is, and a slate or tile finish. So all of those characteristics are very common of a mansard roof. And now I'll look at the changes, and I think the changes are, I have to say, extremely modest and quite difficult to pick up from the drawings. The slope on the front, in the officer's report, it says it's a 5-degree difference. We actually measure it as 2 degrees, and I got the architect to double check it, but it doesn't really matter either way. I think when you look at that, it's very difficult to really conclude that there's any material harm whatsoever from those very modest changes. The knuckle point of the mansard is raised slightly by 10 centimetres, about that much on the Holland Street, and slightly more it's sort of 19 centimetres on this elevation and 10 on the other elevation. Again, very, very small, almost indecipherable changes, I would suggest. And in terms of impact, no increase in height, setback from the parapet, the chimneys still dominate, and it doesn't, in my view, my judgment, look box-like, because it's still, you can still read the slopes and the angles, and even an 80-degree angle is still very easily to see that it is a sloped roof. I think actually the elevation, the south elevation, it's probably slightly enhanced in my view because it's a slightly less hat-like looking mansard by extending it. But it has a major benefit internally, the very constrained space. For example, on the front section, which is 4 meters wide, only 1.8 meter in that is 2.3 meters, which is generally below the normal floor to ceiling height of 2.5. By doing this, it will make 2.8, so the majority of the space will at least be 2.3. So in my view, no harm. It's not box-like. And there is some considerable benefit from easing up those angles within. And again, no objection from any residents or amenity society.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Akkaran, are you saying anything?
Dear councillors, I want to reiterate that this is a really minor adjustment, yet these changes make a difference internally to our day-to-day lives. For such a minor amendment to be scrutinised at this level, it's just hard to take, particularly when there is a 3-storey tall brown brick and glass modern building allowed to be built next door to us at 60 Hornton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions?
I was just wondering, just to amplify what Mr. Lopinier said, or to ask about it, is what percentage of the room will have 2.3 meters with the new arrangement,
right,
as opposed to the current, and also the extant?
Yes, I haven't done it in percentages, and perhaps I should.
Approx, just
but it would be roughly, at the moment, it's about 35%, and I think as would be about 70%.
Thank you. So, okay, and the other thing is, when you mentioned there's a part of it which is 2.8, does that mean that's the total roof height? At the apex. Okay, yeah. So you'll have between 2.3 and a bit more throughout the 70-odd%.
Yeah.
Now I can sympathise. I have a room which is a mansard, 2 rooms in mansard, which luckily it's not too bad. But anyway, thank you.
Thanks very much. I don't know if there are any other further questions. I'm not sure there's a great deal to discuss. Colleagues, any questions to Mr. Taylor? No. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Could I just... I'm intrigued by the detail, which is good, of course, in a way to go into, but it's... talking about the difference in height, in the angle of the slope, going from 15 to 10 degrees. It's not such a big difference, but yet a lot is made of it here, which I was a bit surprised. And also, where are we? The picture of the mansard, southern mansard from 75 to 80. Doesn't sound like a lot, and yet that's like highlighted. And then, the change from 15 degrees to 10 degrees, a reduction of 1/3. But doesn't that give a slightly misleading context? It's from 15 to 10. In the scheme of things, that's not a lot. What do you think? As you can see from the drawings, yourself.
Clearly, in terms of proportion, yes. In the scheme of things, it isn't very much. I think the view that you have expressed in the reports it basically reflects the idea that the roof is already steep enough, and therefore to make it any steeper would be the wrong thing to do.
Fair enough.
But you're absolutely right. You have to look at the exact proportions involved. And as a matter of proportion, clearly the changes are not that significant.
Thank you.
Thanks. It strikes me it's quite a good call in from Councillor Folkes, because otherwise this probably would have been refused under delegated powers, I assume. Mr. Taylor, without sort of wanting to make too much of it, why has this come before us? What's the concern? Is there something we're missing on the part of either Stephanie Malik or the Historic Buildings officer?
No, I don't think there's anything you're missing. I think obviously the report sets out the concerns in all the details. So I don't think you're missing anything. For the mansard, theoretically, a 70-degree sort of lower slope would be the norm. So obviously this isn't the norm, as you've already observed at a quirky building. So maybe it doesn't have to be, a model norm. But I think clearly the view of the conservation officer will reflect how it's departing from the norm or the tradition from.
Because there's nothing nearby that it's clashing with.
No, that's somebody walking along the street probably wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it, and obviously people don't do that normally.
Well, I have a fairly good idea of where we're going with this. Colleagues, the recommendation is that the committee refuses planning permission for the reason given in the report. And can I see how you vote? Councillor Bakhtiar?
Against.
Councillor Dorian? Councillor Schmetterling?
Against.
Councillor Woodgen?
Against the recommendation.
And I'm against the recommendation as well. So we have to not consider any conditions, I don't think, and then vote for why we are wishing to grant planning permission. And I don't think we need to give a reason as per the last one. So the recommendation the motion now is that the committee grants planning permission. And anything to add?
Just the same section 73 points. So again, if you could delegate authority to officers to carry across the relevant conditions from the parent permission.
Sorry, same point as last time. The section 73 point.
With no additional conditions. Like we had last time, we had heading 1.
Exactly, nothing to do with reserved chimney pots or anything like that. So it's just carrying over the parent conditions. Yeah, and with that additional delegation to officers, Councillor Bakhtar.
In favour.
Councillor Join.
In favour.
Councillor Schmetterling, Councillor Woodger.
It's a grant.
And I'm in favour as well. So thank you very much indeed. And we move to the Little Boltons. And that is Alison Long. Thank you.
Good evening. Yeah, can we start or should I just wait a minute until...
Maybe just give it a few seconds. Yeah. Oh, actually, Councillor Schmatling would like us to take a very short break. So, 3 minutes? What's your plan? As quickly as possible. with Alison Long on the Little Boltons. Thank you very much.
Good evening. So the application site comprises a residential dwelling located on the north-east side of the Little Boltons. The property has an existing basement within the garden which was granted planning permission in 2007 and can be seen in the images here. The current application is for a single-storey basement under the footprint of the dwelling, with a light well to the front and the replacement of 2 circular light wells within the rear garden with a single roof light. The existing section shows the location of the existing basement, and the proposed shows the basement below the footprint of the dwelling. At lower ground floor level, planning permission is also sought for the construction of a replacement full-width lower ground floor extension, which would extend out by a further 1 metre from the existing structures in this location. At ground floor level, the existing terrace area will be extended to the roof of the lower ground floor extension. At roof level, planning permission is also sought for 2 dormer windows to the front elevation and associated roof lights replacing the existing. This slide shows the existing and proposed front elevation, and I would note the dormers to the front roof slope of the adjoining property 26 The Little Boltons. Planning permission is also sought for the replacement white painted timber framed windows. Finally, this slide shows the existing and proposed rear elevations. Planning permission is also sought for replacement white painted timber frame windows and doors, except at lower ground floor level, and the replacement of the black painted metal balustrades. That concludes my presentation, and the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions in section 8.
Excellent, thank you very much. No registered speakers, so colleagues, opportunity to put any questions you like to Alison Long. I have one. You mentioned the magic word for me, windows. Presumably the proposal is to replace them with timber, like for like.
That's correct, excluding the lower ground floor rear extension where the aluminium framing is proposed. So there's conditions that would secure the timber frame for the rest of them, and also details, more detail at section 1 to 5, I think it is, also by condition 3.
Brilliant. Just look at that condition really quickly. Yeah, number 5 then. Lead-clad dormer windows. It seems to me that it's a rationalisation and an improvement. And just to be clear, the basement going under the whole garden, Alison may have made this point, but that's already there. So there's no breach of the condition. Right. Nothing more. Okay, we'll move to a vote. Yeah.
But perhaps an observation. By the way, is this being live streamed? I can't remember. It's not. Is it? Okay. It seems most of the objections do not seem to relate to actual planning matters, like yet another construction project or inadequate management plan. Am I correct in seeing that?
Yes, that's correct. A lot of the concerns are surrounding the construction impacts and the actual build itself, rather than the nature of the works.
So, will you be looking for a final construction management plan that is more satisfactory?
Yes, that's correct. Conditions are recommended to secure a final construction traffic management plan prior to the commencement of development, and an informative is also recommended which highlights issues that final CTMP should address.
Yes, because at least one of the objectors spoke about the frequency of vehicles in the window.
Yes, that's correct. As I said, an informative is attached which recommends, from following consultation with our highways officers, matters which should be addressed, and that includes clear and concise information.
Thank you.
Good. Any more for anyone? No. Well, the recommendation is the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Councillor Batcher. Councillor Doring.
In favour.
In favour. And I'm in favour as well, so planning permission is granted. Thank you very much. And we move to Kingsgate House, which is also Alison Long.
Thank you. Okay, the application is in connection with the replacement of cladding works approved for Kingsgate House, located on the north side of Kings Road at the junction with Gunter Grove. Advertisement consent is sought for the display of 2 externally illuminated advertisements on the Kings Road and Gunter Grove elevations of a scaffold screening shroud to surround Kingsgate House. This slide shows the existing and proposed south elevation, and this slide shows the existing proposed west elevation. The officer recommendation is to grant advertisement consent subject to the recommended conditions in section 8. This includes conditions restricting the display of the advertisements until the 1st of February 2023, as well as hours of illumination and brightness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No registered speakers. So, colleagues, any questions for Alice Long? What are the hours of illumination?
So it differs for the 2 adverts. The advert facing west towards Gunter Grove should only be illuminated between 0700 and midnight, and the advert facing south only illuminated between 1700 hours and midnight. And that's following concerns raised by Highways.
Interesting.
Seems quite late.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly major thoroughfare, but
can I just ask, I mean, are there any controls on the amount of light? Because a reasonable objection is that it could be very distracting to drivers and cyclists. Pardon?
There's also condition 8, which limits the illuminance levels at 300 candelas.
Yeah, this tends to be done.
Oh yes, 300 candelas. Okay, thank you.
By officers, yeah. 300 candelars per square metre. So that's how you pronounce a candelabra. Okay. What?
Candela, it's not
Candela. I knew I'd get it right.
300, I think it's probably not that bright. I can't remember if the effect is, but it probably isn't that bright.
Right.
Can we condition to cut the hours?
We could do, I think. Whether we could reduce the hours of illumination by condition.
If you felt it was appropriate, then we could amend the condition.
I would say so.
You don't want it too late?
Well, no, I think midnight's a bit too late.
So you should shut pub closing time.
I'd say 9 or 10 p.m.
2200?
Arguably, part of the point of the advertisement, illuminated advertisement, is that it's visible at night. I don't know.
But people obviously live nearby. It's lighting up.
Yeah, well, isn't that dealt with in the 300 candelas per square metre condition? The level of illumination.
My point of view is...
I don't know. I personally a little bit reluctant to second guess the experienced officers and their suggested hours, but
what do you think, Dory? You said 2,200 hours.
Well, sorry, if I said 2,200, well, I just think what you were trying to say. I don't think it matters that much, because what's opposite? It's got to be on the who's going to be disturbed by it. I mean, aside from the car, the drivers and the cyclists, who else is going to be disturbed by it?
It faces Gunter Grove and the Kings Road, doesn't it?
Yeah, but what kind of resident? Well, other side of Kings Road, you know, how residential? Obviously, not all residential, but what is on the left? That's, I think, Gunter Grove frontage.
538 Kings Road.
Pardon?
538 Kings Road is that white house you can see on the corner.
If we in our power
facing
limit
as the
any
sun
harm
on
this
those.
does, I recommend we do. That's why I think 10 p.m. cut-off is reasonable. That's my...
What do we do elsewhere in the borough for illuminated advertisements on major thoroughfares?
There's no set time frame. It really is a case by case what you consider appropriate for the location of it, taking into account what's in the surrounding area. So it really is open to interpretation in terms of what you think is an appropriate time. Obviously, midnight has been suggested because of the location of it, restricting it between the overnight period. Obviously, it's open to you should you wish to revise that.
Okay, who has strong views?
I'm just thinking it's less than a year till 1st of February 2023, so the maximum is 11 months, let's say. So it's not terribly onerous. And if anyone complains, then we'll find out.
Is that right? Is it actually till a fixed date, or is it for 12 months?
It's fixed date.
It is a fixed date, so quite right. Okay, so now you said 10 o'clock, did you?
I think 10 p.m. is reasonable.
Anyone want to speak against that?
Actually, I'd be more liberal, given it's a limited time thing. But
you'd be what?
I'd be more liberal about it. I'd think 11 p.m. let's say, as a compromise. Otherwise, okay. I wouldn't mind midnight, really.
He's getting 10 p.m. He's getting 11 p.m. I'm happy with midnight, but
I'm happy with midnight too. Actually, I'm not that unhappy about it because then traffic drops anyway, and
we've got Maxwell's proposed condition of 10 p.m. or amendment to the condition. Who supports that? Otherwise, we'll go with midnight because you think 10's good, and Hamish. Okay, fine. So I think, Dory, by the looks of things, it's 10 p.m. condition, if you're happy with that. And we will vote on the recommendation to grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report, but the hours condition amended to 10 p.m. instead of midnight for both advertisements on Ashburnham, the one facing Ashburnham Road. Is it Ashburnham? Anyway, the south elevation and the west elevation, both to a 10 p.m. switch off. And how do we vote? Councillor Bachelor, in favour? In favour, Councillor Stratton?
In favour.
Councillor Woodger?
In favour with the 10 p.m. amendment.
Yeah, and I'm in favour with the 10 p.m. Thank you very much. So we'll now move to number 6. Victoria Grove and Councillor Bachelor is going to sit this out. You can either leave the chamber or you can sit elsewhere. Thank you very much. And that's Derek Taylor.
Right, so this is basically a proposal to extend the building by adding a rear extension and roof extension. You can see the application property outlined in red as usual. You see it on the south side of Victoria Grove. And what you can see there is that from the south, by virtue of the building that runs along the southern side of the property, what happens at the property would not be particularly visible. On the other hand, when you look to the left of the photograph, you can see obviously from the gardens along in the central part of the image, or from the rears of the property on the left-hand side, that they get views that look straight across at the rear. So it's sort of hidden from one side, but not from the other. And that's looking up at the existing roof. So you can see there it's sort of a standard pitched roof with dormer windows. And that's the existing roof plan on the right, and then the top floor plan on the left. So that's the proposed, and that's the existing. So if you look there, you can see that the loft floor, as they call it there, is extended rearwards, and then the roof is also extended rearwards in the fashion that you see there. And then that's the rear elevation as existing on the left, and then as proposed on the right. So if you look at the right-hand image, you can see that the key point is that what's a little single-storey extension at the rear at that level now has an additional floor attached and has a sloping roof on one side, and then the main roof is at the back of the image, and you can see how the dormer window is extended and then run around into the roof extension. I think the next slide will make that clearer. So that those are the side elevations existing at the top and proposed at the bottom. So you can see there how the main roof is effectively extended rearwards over the rear extension. And I think this image probably shows it most graphically. So you can see there how the dormer window is effectively merged into the extended rear extension. So there's a sort of pseudo Mansard slope on the side of the extension. And then that's the extended dormer window behind. So it effectively turns the top floor into a sort of L-shaped floor, wrapping around the rear extension. And that's that.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. No registered speakers. So, colleagues, any questions for Mr. Taylor? I find that last slide quite interesting. I hadn't seen that one before. Maybe it was in our report and I missed it, but it's tricky, this one, isn't it? I'm not wholly convinced that that's a great piece of design. And starts to blur the boundaries between the closet wing and the building. Sorry, yeah, going rather ponderously, quietly here. Any views on that?
Well, as a Queensgate councillor, Queensgate is very, very varied in its architecture. As a Queensgate councillor, it's a very varied area. There is no sort of architectural symmetry in quite a lot of the area. I think what's proposed seems reasonable. It is, it's not ideal, but I think for me, I think it's acceptable. So on balance, I think I would probably vote in favour of this proposal to grant, as opposed to what's being recommended to refuse.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
I mean, I think that given that this is in the De Vere conservation area, and nobody from the conservation area has objected, and I'm sure that normally people in those conservation societies do object where they want to, have to, or feel like they should. So I really don't see any problems, because nobody else has overlooked. It even says in the officer's report that it's not such a big deal. So I don't see the difficulty, because the buildings next door, as you can see very well in that picture, there's nothing special about the walls that we see there and the roof, just a mansard roof. I mean, is the extension plan is going to be painted, presumably? It's that colour because of CGI and to highlight it, or is it stock brick?
No, the extension is proposed in stock brick.
Stock brick.
And then
but even so,
it's got a mansard slope on one side and then stock brick for the main elevation.
Right. But even so, if no one's complaining about being overlooked or whatever, then I really don't think it's such a problem at all. Well, that's my view.
I think that the reason it's recommended for refusal isn't to do with overlooking.
I realise that.
I mean, the key point is, how does it relate to policies? Is it subservient to the parent building? And then if the conclusion, which I think would have to be that it's not subservient to the parent building, then what's the justification to make an exception to the policy?
Well, yes, I would agree it's not exactly subservient, but on the other hand, we have to look at each application on its own, separately on its merits. And I'm not sure that this has a really negative impact on the conservation area. If no one can see it, nobody's objecting.
An opposing view might be that this is trying to sort of shoehorn additional floor space in wherever it's possible to get it, even at the expense of producing that rather odd effect of the sloping mansard.
It's called quirkiness.
I missed that. Sorry.
No, I mean, I take your point, but on the other hand, things move on. People need space. You can't build up. You can't. It's difficult. Well, here's building sideways, so to speak, but
yeah,
difficult to build down. You can't build. Difficult to build up. Sometimes people need more space, and nobody wants to move out. Plus, it would be very expensive. So,
and it is illustrative, as you say, that there have been no objections from anyone. Councillor Duran, any views?
Interesting, as we've seen in other examples this evening, people are finding creative ways to try and maximise space in as many ways as possible. Well, I think that's commendable to some extent. But again, we do have to consider on a case-by-case basis whether it does fit in with the surroundings. So yeah, I can see there are pros and cons to this one. I can understand where the officers are coming from.
Councillor Woodard, anything to add? You've said
No, I've said my piece.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think for my part, on balance, I'm with officers, and I think the policy's there for a reason, and I understand that otherwise we might get quite a lot of these where the closet wing becomes as important as the thing to which it's attached. So I don't think I can support this, but I appreciate colleagues may have an opposing view. So let us put this to a vote, and I don't think there's anything else to say first. So the recommendation is that the committee refuses planning permission for the following summarised reasons. Summarised, and then the full reasons are in section 8. And Councillor Adurin.
In favour.
In favour of the recommendation to refuse. Yeah. Councillor Schmettler.
I mean, I do see also where the offers are coming from, obviously, because they've said so quite clearly, but I'm against the recommendation.
Councillor Woodard.
Against the recommendation.
And I am in favour of the recommendation.
I'm in favour of the recommendation, and I'm afraid on this occasion I have the casting vote, I think. So I think the recommendation is carried, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm afraid the planning permission is refused. So we now move to number 7, 90 Abingdon Road.
So essentially, this is a proposal to insert aluminium frame doors, bifold doors, and a roof light to the rear elevation. And that's the approved elevation for the rear of the property. And then that's the proposed elevation for the rear of the property. To put it in context, that sort of shows you that actually we do have quite heavily altered rear elevations here. And if you look at the neighbouring property, they already have black aluminium doors in their rear elevation. So in that context and at that level, it's recommended for approval.
That's that. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any registered speakers? Any questions, Mr. Taylor? Seemingly not. I had one point.
Got one point. I just want to understand the objections of it. I mean, some of them have probably misunderstood the application as written, as shown by the response. But I'm just wondering about this, the bifolding doors at a high level. And could I please see the drawing again, which shows the before and after?
So basically, you've got the lower ground floor level there,
right,
and then you've got the upper ground floor, which relates on the photograph. That's the lower ground floor beneath the metal staircase.
Sorry, is that both of those when the pointer's moving?
Yeah,
that's both of them are in the same property.
The lower, yeah, that's the same property.
So on the right, the window on the right is the same property. That's it.
No, that's the neighbouring property.
No, sorry.
This one.
Go back to the bifolding door, and then go to the right, one window.
Right, so this window here.
Yes, is that the neighbouring property?
No, that's the application property.
One? Oh, right, okay.
So if I go back to the drawing.
Yeah.
Basically, you can see that the property has a rear extension, and then it is proposed to extend it at the back. This was the approved rear elevation, so there's already planning permission for the extension and the balconies and so on. The change that's now proposed is to change the doors to aluminium framing. That's all that's before you.
Yeah, because it's a Section 73 application, is it not?
It's not actually a huge change, is it?
Well, I mean, that's why it's recommended for approval.
Yeah, it's wooden doors and windows to powder coated aluminium. The point I'd make is that quite often we
microphone, Chair.
Quite often we say that at lower ground and ground floor, we're happy with powder coated aluminium, but above that, timber reigns supreme. Here I see we're creeping up to upper ground floor, but the photograph, the next slide, is quite illustrative because I see next door has got those dark powder coated aluminium frames at upper ground. So I think it's probably it would be unfair and possibly indefensible to refuse the application property those windows. Any other views?
Right. The recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission to the conditions listed in section 8 of the report.
Councillor Bakhtiar? In favour. Councillor Dorian?
In favour.
Councillor Schmetling?
In favour.
Councillor Woodger?
In favour.
And I'm in favour as well. First unanimous one of the evening. Right. And then the last one for the evening is 16B, Kensington Court Gardens. And essentially the application concerns this lower ground floor light well that wraps around the building at the lower level. So you can see part of it there in that photograph, and the proposal is to infill most of that with a conservatory structure. That's looking along the back of the property, so you can see there the little porch that gives access to the outside space. Obviously, you can see that from the dimension of the space, you can't do too much with it. That's the existing flat, and you can see how the space wraps around it, sort of narrow on all sides, really. And then that's the space infilled with the glazed extension. The extension would be in timber and glass, and it would actually keep a small light well for ventilation, mainly up at the top left corner of that slide. And that's what it would look like in section. So it's timber and glass, leaving a small light well at one end. And that's that slide.
That's very helpful, thank you. Timber and glass, I'm pleased to hear. Colleagues, any other questions? Mr. Taylor?
No. Right. That's quick. The turn to it in my pad. The recommendation is that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Councillor Bakhtiar. Councillor Dorian.
In favour.
In favour. Also.
In favour.
And me too. Nem con. Thank you very much indeed.